The morning sun spilled through the grimy windows of Joe's Diner in downtown Detroit, casting a faint golden glow over the chipped formica tables. The air buzzed with the comforting hum of frying bacon and brewing coffee, a fleeting slice of peace in a city that never sleeps. Regulars hunched over their plates, savoring the calm, their murmured conversations blending with the clatter of forks on plates. It was a sanctuary, a rare pause in the urban chaos until the door exploded open with a deafening bang. A gust of icy wind roared in, carrying the stench of gasoline and leather as Jake Razor Malone stormed through, his biker gang trailing like a pack of rabid wolves. His mid-40s frame, scarred with jagged tattoos and draped in a vest screaming hate-fueled symbols, loomed like a predator staking its claim. The diner's warmth evaporated, replaced by a suffocating dread that gripped every soul in the room. Forks froze mid-air, coffee cups trembled in shaky hands, and the air thickened with the promise of violence. Jake's boots pounded the linoleum like war drums, his broad shoulders cutting through the crowd as his cold, predatory eyes scanned for a target. The once cozy haven morphed into a powder keg, teetering on the edge of chaos. Little did Jake know, his reign of terror was about to slam headfirst into a force of nature. Mike Tyson, lurking in the shadows, ready to unleash hell. The air in Joe's Diner turned sour as Jake Razor Malone zeroed in on his prey. Amid the clatter of dropped forks and stifled gasps, Sarah Mitchell sat alone at a corner booth, her quiet elegance a stark contrast to the grime of the place. Her auburn hair caught the dim light like a halo, framing a face carved with grace. Sharp cheekbones, steady hazel eyes scanning a worn paperback. She sipped her black coffee, the steam curling around her like a shield, oblivious to the storm brewing just feet away. But Jake saw her, and that was enough. His lips twisted into a sneer, a predator's grin that promised cruelty. The bikers fanned out behind him, their leather creaking like a chorus of vipers, egging him on with low chuckles that rumbled through the diner like distant thunder. Jake strutted over, his shadow swallowing her table hole. "Well, ain't this a sight?" he growled, his voice a gravelly taunt, dripping with venom. "Some fancy broad sitting here, like she owns the joint." Sarah didn't flinch. She set her coffee down with deliberate calm, her gaze locking onto his like a sniper, lining up a shot. "Just drinking my coffee," she said, her tone cool as steel, cutting through his bravado. The room held its breath. Every patron knew this wasn't just defiance, it was a dare. Jake's eyes narrowed, his tattooed knuckles whitening as he clenched his fists. He leaned in close, his hot breath reeking of cheap whiskey and hate. "Fancy types like you think you're better than us, huh?" he snarled, slamming a meaty hand on her table. The paperback jumped, pages fluttering like a trapped bird. The bikers howled, their laughter a jagged blade slicing through the tension. Jake, emboldened, snatched her coffee cup, his fingers wrapping around it like a claw. With a slow, sadistic twist, he tipped it over, letting the dark brew spill across the table and drip onto the floor. It pooled at Sarah's feet, a deliberate stain of humiliation, each drop echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Her hand stayed steady, but under the table, her fingers twitched. Not with fear, but with a simmering rage, she held tight like a coiled spring. The diner's patrons shrank back, their eyes darting away, too scared to intervene, too ashamed to watch. Jake straightened up, cracking his neck with a sickening pop. "Let's see how tough you are now, sweetheart," he hissed, his words slithering through the air like a snake on the hunt. Sarah's composure didn't crack. She wiped a stray drop of coffee from her sleeve, her movements slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. Then she looked up, her eyes blazing with a quiet fire that made Jake's smirk falter for a split second. "You don't scare me," she said, her voice low but piercing, a challenge wrapped in velvet. The biker's laughter died, replaced by an uneasy shuffle. Jake's face twisted. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not by a woman who looked like she belonged in a magazine, not a dive like this. He leaned in again, his shadow darkening her face, ready to escalate his cruelty into something uglier. But what he didn't see, what no one saw, was the storm about to break loose. Mike Tyson was already there, watching, waiting, his fists itching to turn this into a reckoning. Hey, if you're loving this showdown, drop a 1 in the comments and smash that subscribe button. We're just getting started. Want Jake to get what's coming? Hit like and stick around to see Mike Tyson unleash hell. Curious who's gonna bleed next? Share this with a friend and tell us, Team Sarah or Team Razor? Let's blow this up, Detroit style. This version ramps up the drama with vivid imagery, sharp dialogue, and a cliffhanger that teases Mike Tyson's imminent action. The audience interaction call-out is bold and playful, designed to spark curiosity and engagement, while keeping the tone gritty and American. The tension in Joe's diner hung thick as tar, choking the air as Jake Razor Malone towered over Sarah Mitchell. Her coffee lay spilled across the floor, a mocking puddle of his dominance. But Sarah's hazel eyes burned with a defiance that gnawed at his pride. Jake's lips curled into a snarl, his tattooed fists twitching, itching to crush her calm into dust. The bikers behind him snickered, their laughter a jagged edge slicing through the silence, feeding his rage. He leaned closer, his breath a rancid cloud of whiskey and spite. "You think you're tough, huh, princess?" he hissed, his voice a low, venomous growl. "Let's see how pretty you look when I'm done." The threat landed like a Molotov cocktail, igniting the fear in the room. Patrons shrank deeper into their booths, eyes averted, hearts pounding against ribs like war drums. Sarah didn't blink. She set her paperback down with a slow, deliberate thud, her movements a quiet rebellion that screamed louder than words. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady as granite, cutting through the haze of his intimidation. Jake's smirk twitched, a crack in his armor, but he doubled down, slamming his palm on the table so hard the wood groaned. "Big words for a little girl," he spat, his eyes narrowing into slits of malice. "Who's gonna save you? Some pencil-neck boyfriend?" The bikers roared, their howls bouncing off the diner's peeling walls, a pack of hyenas circling a wounded deer. Then, Sarah straightened, her posture a blade unsheathed. She met his gaze, unflinching, and dropped the bomb that shifted the earth beneath his boots. "My husband," she said, her tone icy and precise, "is Mike Tyson." The words detonated in the air, a shockwave that silenced the room. Forks clattered to plates, breaths caught in throats, and the diner became a graveyard of sound. Jake's bravado flickered. He blinked, his brain scrambling to process the name. Mike Tyson. The Mike Tyson. The heavyweight legend whose fists had turned men into myths and nightmares. For a heartbeat, fear flashed in Jake's eyes. A deer caught in headlights, but he masked it fast, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a choke. "Mike Tyson?" he sneered, slamming his hand on the table again. The sound a desperate thunderclap. "That washed-up boxer? What's he gonna do? Throw a Hollywood jab?" His voice trembled at the edges, betraying the bravado he clung to like a lifeline. The bikers shifted uneasily, their laughter dying into coughs, sensing the storm brewing. Jake leaned in, his shadow swallowing Sarah whole, his finger jabbing the air inches from her face. "You're bluffing, sweetheart. Ain't no champ here to save your ass." But his words rang hollow, a hollow bravado echoing in a room that suddenly felt too small. Sarah's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Not fear, not surrender, but a promise. She didn't flinch, didn't falter, her silence a weapon sharper than his threats. Jake's gang exchanged glances, their confidence crumbling like dry dirt. The air thickened, electric, as if the diner itself held its breath. Jake's chest heaved, his ego teetering on the edge of collapse, oblivious to the shadow growing behind him. Mike Tyson, unseen, unheard, a colossus of fury, about to turn this dive into a battlefield. The reckoning was seconds away, and Jake had no idea the hell he'd just invited. This version heightens the suspense with vivid imagery, sharp dialogue, and a slow burn escalation, building to the imminent clash with Mike Tyson, while keeping the stakes personal and raw. The air in Joe's diner turned to ice as Jake Razor Malone's taunts hung like a noose over Sarah Mitchell. Her calm declaration, "My husband is Mike Tyson," had landed like a grenade, but Jake's forced laugh still echoed, a desperate attempt to claw back control. "Mike Tyson, huh? That has-been?" he jeered, his voice cracking at the edges, his bravado a thin veneer over the panic flickering in his gut. The bikers behind him shifted, their boots scuffing the linoleum, their chuckles fading into uneasy murmurs. Sarah's gaze never wavered, her hazel eyes drilling into him, a quiet storm brewing beneath her poise. Jake's hand twitched toward her spilled coffee cup, ready to escalate his humiliation. But then, the room trembled. Here's a 500-word rewrite of the fifth main point, continuing the scene at Joe's Diner in Detroit, with Jake Razor Malone, Sarah Mitchell, and Mike Tyson. It's crafted in an American cultural style with escalated drama and tension, without audience interaction prompts. The standoff in Joe's Diner teetered on a razor's edge, the air thick with the stench of fear and spilled coffee. Jake Razor Malone stood inches from Sarah Mitchell, his sneer a twisted mask of defiance, but his eyes betrayed him, wide, flickering, cornered. He'd mocked her, humiliated her, and spat venom at the mention of Mike Tyson, dismissing him as a faded star. Now, Tyson loomed before him, a 5'10" juggernaut of muscle and malice, his black hoodie casting shadows that swallowed the light. Jake's gang hovered behind, their leather creaking, hands twitching, but their bravado had evaporated into a cold sweat. The diner's patrons pressed against the walls, their breaths shallow, caught in the gravity of a collision about to ignite. Tyson's voice sliced through the silence, a guttural snarl. "You're done, punk!" Jake flinched, his bravado cracking like thin ice. "Yeah? You don't scare me," he barked, but his voice shook, a hollow bluff. Tyson didn't blink. In a flash, his hand shot out, seizing Jake's arm with a grip like a hydraulic press. The biker's wrist twisted with a wet snap, his scream swallowed by the force yanking him forward. Tyson slammed him into the counter, hard. The impact roared through the diner, a cannon shot of splintering wood and shattering glass. Jake's face smashed down, blood exploding from his nose, staining the formica in a crimson smear. Plates skidded, mugs burst into jagged shards, and the air filled with the metallic tang of violence. Jake clawed at the counter, his legs buckling, but Tyson wasn't finished. With a flick of his wrist, he spun the biker like a rag doll and hurled him into a table. The crash was apocalyptic. Wood splintered into a storm of debris, chairs toppling as Jake's body hit the floor in a crumpled heap. His gang recoiled, their faces ghost white, eyes darting between their broken leader and the titan who'd dismantled him. They'd seen Jake crack skulls in back alleys, leave men bleeding in gutters. But this was annihilation, a one-man wrecking crew tearing through their world. Tyson stood over him, fists still coiled, his breathing steady, a predator mid-feast. Jake wheezed, blood bubbling from his lips, his reign of terror reduced to a whimpering pile of flesh and leather. The diner trembled in the aftermath, the silence deafening, broken only by the drip of coffee mingling with blood on the floor. Sarah watched from her booth, her expression a fortress of calm, her hands steady now, unshaken by the chaos. The patrons' eyes locked on Tyson, a mix of awe and dread. They'd cowered under Jake's shadow, but this was something else, something primal. Jake's gang stood paralyzed, their loyalty shredded, their myth of invincibility crushed under Tyson's boots. He didn't need to speak. The message was carved in the wreckage. Cross his line, and you'd pay in bone and blood. Jake's reign was over, and the reckoning had only just begun. This version intensifies the action with visceral details, rapid pacing, and a brutal display of Tyson's dominance, amplifying the stakes and shattering Jake's control in a cinematic clash. A shadow swallowed the light, a presence so heavy it warped the air. Mike Tyson stepped from the back of the diner, his silhouette emerging like a specter of vengeance. At 5'10", he was a wall of muscle, his black hoodie stretched tight over shoulders that could bench a truck. His footsteps thudded like war drums, each one a countdown to chaos. The patrons froze, forks midair, breaths caught, eyes wide as saucers. Jake's head snapped around, his sneer melting into a grimace as he registered the man closing in. Tyson's face was stone, his eyes two black coals, burning with a fury that could melt steel. The diner shrank under his gaze, a pressure cooker ready to blow. "You got a problem, tough guy." Tyson's voice rolled out, low and lethal, a rumble that shook the walls. It wasn't a question, It was a death knell. Jake stumbled back a step, his bravado crumbling like ash, but he squared his shoulders, clinging to his pride. "What's it to you, huh?" he barked, his tone shrill. A cornered dog baring its teeth. The bikers tensed, hands hovering near their belts, but their eyes betrayed them. Fear had already sunk its claws deep. Tyson advanced, slow and deliberate, his fists unclenching just enough to flex knuckles scarred from a lifetime of breaking men like Jake. The space between them crackled, electric with impending violence. "You just messed with my wife," Tyson said, each word a hammer strike, his voice calm but laced with a menace that turned Jake's blood to ice. The biker's face paled, his tattoos suddenly looking like cheap graffiti on a sinking ship. He opened his mouth to retort, but no sound came. Only a dry rasp as Tyson loomed closer. A predator, savoring the kill. The diner's fluorescent lights flickered, casting jagged shadows that danced across Tyson's frame, amplifying his menace. Jake's gang shrank back, their loyalty dissolving in the face of a legend made flesh. Sarah sat still, her hands folded, a queen watching her knight unsheathe his blade. Jake's eyes darted, searching for an escape, but there was none. Tyson stopped inches away, his breath a controlled hiss, his presence a guillotine blade poised to drop. The diner held its breath, the silence a scream waiting to erupt. Jake had mocked the wrong woman, and now hell was stepping through the door. This version builds relentless tension with vivid descriptions, stark contrasts, and a slow, menacing approach from Tyson, setting the stage for an explosive confrontation. The wreckage of Joe's diner lay strewn across the floor. Shattered wood, broken glass, and Jake Razor Malone's battered body sprawled amid the chaos. Mike Tyson stood over him, a 5'10" titan of fury, his fists still clenched, blood flecking his knuckles. Jake's face was a roadmap of ruin, nose smashed, lips split, eyes glassy with pain and defeat. His gang hovered at the edges, their leather vests no armor against the terror Tyson had unleashed. The air reeked of sweat, blood, and fear. The diner's once familiar hum replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Sarah Mitchell sat in her booth, her hazel eyes steady, a queen presiding over a battlefield she'd never asked for. Tyson's shadow swallowed Jake whole as he grabbed the biker's collar, hoisting him up like a broken puppet. "Apologize," he growled, his voice a low seismic rumble that shook the room. Jake's head lolled, blood dripping onto his vest, but his defiance clung like a dying ember. He spat a red glob onto the floor, a weak snarl curling his lip. Tyson's grip tightened, his fingers digging into flesh, and he shoved Jake's face towards Sarah. "Say it, or I'll break more than your pride." The threat hung like a guillotine blade, sharp and final. Jake's gang flinched, their boots scuffing, but they were statues, paralyzed, useless, watching their leader crumble. Jake's voice rasped out, a pitiful croak. "Sorry." It was barely audible, a whisper drowned in shame. But Tyson wasn't satisfied. He leaned in, his breath hot against Jake's ear. "Louder," he snarled, his tone a whip crack of command. Jake's chest heaved, a ragged gasp, and he choked out, "I'm sorry." The words echoed, a surrender carved in desperation, stripping him bare before the diner's wide-eyed patrons. Tyson released him, letting him slump back into the debris, a king dethroned. He turned to the gang, his eyes blazing coals. "You touch her or anyone again, I'll hunt you down, every last one of you." His voice was a thunderclap, a vow etched in iron, promising a reckoning they couldn't outrun. Sarah rose, her grace unshaken, and met Tyson's gaze with a nod. A silent pact of justice served. The diner trembled under the weight of the lesson. Strength wasn't Jake's cruelty. It was Tyson standing tall when it mattered. Jake's crew shrank back, their myth shattered, their terror a living thing. The air crackled with the aftermath, a storm spent but still electric. Yo, if this beatdown got your blood pumping, smash that like button and drop a 6 in the comments. Let's see if Jake's got any fight left. Not feeling it? Hit dislike and tell us why. Want to know if Tyson's wrath spares the gang? Subscribe now. Next round's going to be a knockout, and you won't want to miss who's bleeding by the end. Share this chaos with your crew and guess, can Jake crawl back or is he done for good? This version amps up the drama with visceral action, stark power shifts, and a gripping morale. while the call-out fuels curiosity and invites viewers to predict the next twist. The dust settled in Joe's diner, a graveyard of splintered tables and shattered pride. Jake Razor Malone lay crumpled on the floor, his blood-streaked face a testament to Mike Tyson's wrath. His forced apology still lingered in the air, a broken whimper that had stripped him bare. Tyson stood tall, his 5'10" frame a monolith of justice, his black hoodie stained with the fight's aftermath. Sarah Mitchell rose from her booth, her auburn hair catching the light, her calm unshaken by the storm that had raged around her. The biker gang hovered near the door, their leather vests sagging, their eyes darting like trapped rats. Jake's reign was over, and they knew it. The diner's patrons, once paralyzed by fear, now stirred, their breaths uneven, their gazes locked on the scene unfolding. Tyson's voice cut through the silence, a deep growl laced with steel. "You thought you could walk in here, disrespect my wife, and nobody'd stop you?" He stepped over Jake's sprawled form, his boots crunching glass, and faced the gang. "You're wrong. Dead wrong." The words landed like punches, each syllable a blow to their crumbling bravado. Jake groaned, clawing at the floor, but Tyson's foot pressed down on his chest. Not hard, just enough to pin him like a bug. The biker's wheeze was pitiful, his tattoos fading into insignificance under the weight of his defeat. The gang flinched, their hands twitching, but they were shadows of the menace they'd been, their loyalty bleeding out with every second Tyson loomed. The room shifted. A waitress, her apron trembling moments ago, straightened, her eyes wide with something new. Hope. A trucker at the counter unclenched his fists, his jaw set, a spark igniting in his weathered face. The patron's fear began to crack, peeling away like old paint, to reveal a raw, dawning realization. Tyson turned to them, his gaze sweeping the diner like a searchlight. "You all saw it," he thundered, his voice a wake-up call rattling the windows. "This punk thrived 'cause you stayed quiet. That ends now." His words were a spark, catching fire in their chests. Guilt morphed into resolve, shame into a quiet roar. Jake's gang edged toward the exit, their boots scuffing in retreat, but Tyson's glare pinned them mid-step. "Run all you want," he snarled, "but this lesson sticks." The door slammed behind them, a gunshot of finality, and the diner erupted, not in chaos but in a wave of release. Hands unclenched, shoulders squared, and a low murmur swelled into cheers, ragged and real. Sarah stepped beside Tyson, her hand brushing his, a silent anchor in the storm he'd unleashed. The patrons' applause grew, a tidal wave of catharsis washing over the wreckage. Jake lay still, a fallen tyrant, as the diner transformed. Not just a dive, but a crucible where fear burned away, leaving courage in its ashes. Tyson had spoken, and they'd listened. Justice wasn't just his fists, it was their stand. This version ramps up the drama with vivid imagery, emotional shifts, and a transformative climax, showing the crowd's awakening as Tyson's victory reshapes the room's soul. The echoes of applause still rippled through Joe's diner, a raw, jagged hymn rising from the ashes of Jake Razor Malone's downfall. The biker lay sprawled in the debris, a broken king dethroned, his blood pooling with the spilled coffee that had sparked this reckoning. Mike Tyson stood like a colossus, his 5'10" frame radiating a quiet fury that filled the room, his black hoodie now a shroud of victory. Sarah Mitchell stepped beside him, her auburn hair glowing in the dim light, her hazel eyes steady as they surveyed the chaos, her calm a beacon amid the storm. The biker gang had fled, their boots pounding the pavement outside, leaving only the ghost of their terror behind. The diner's patrons stood electrified, their fear replaced by a fire that crackled in their veins, ignited by Tyson's stand. Tyson turned to Jake, his voice a low growl that rumbled like distant thunder. "You ever pull this again, anywhere, anyone, I'll find you." He knelt, his face inches from Jake's battered one, his words a blade pressed to the biker's throat. "And next time, you won't walk away." Jake's eyes, swollen and wild, darted in panic, his breath a ragged wheeze as he nodded frantically, a puppet with severed strings. Tyson rose, his shadow stretching across the wreckage, and faced the crowd. "That goes for all of you," he roared, his voice a cannon blast that shook the walls. You let guys like him run wild, you're part of the mess. Stand up, or live on your knees. The words hit like a shockwave, slamming into the patrons' chests. The trucker at the counter slammed his fist on the bar, his knuckles white, his eyes blazing with a vow unspoken. The waitress clutched her tray, tears streaking her face, but her jaw clenched with newfound steel. The air thrummed with a pulse of awakening. Fear burned away, replaced by a gritty Detroit-born resolve. Tyson's gaze softened as it met Sarah's, a flicker of warmth breaking through his iron mask. "You good?" he murmured, his hand brushing hers. She nodded, her lips curving faintly, a warrior's grace in her silence. He turned to the door, Sarah at his side, but paused on the threshold. The diner fell silent, every eye locked on him, the air taut as a bowstring. "Don't wait for a savior," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the haze. "Be one, or nothing changes." The words hung heavy, a gauntlet thrown at their feet, daring them to rise. Then he stepped out, Sarah beside him, their silhouettes swallowed by the Detroit dawn. Two figures forged in fire, leaving a battlefield behind. The door slammed shut, a final gunshot of truth. The patrons stood frozen, then moved, slowly at first, then with purpose. Hands unclenched, voices rose, and eyes met with a spark of defiance. Joe's Diner wasn't just a dive anymore, it was a forge, and Tyson's words were the hammer that shaped them. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious, but inside, a revolution had begun, raw and unshakable. This version heightens the stakes with vivid imagery, emotional resonance, and a climactic call to action, transforming the diner into a symbol of gritty American resolve.